But
Yeah.
look,
You know, we're done. It's like, no, we're
my
not.
view-
Now we want the next thing.
I think guns is a good analog to this. I think we need more constitutional carry across the board. I think people that use guns to kill the innocent are evil and must be stopped. So my view is like, individuals have their rights, but just because you have access to something doesn't mean it's your fault that another person did something bad. So if there are groomers
True.
and abusers trying to come into this space, I'm not going to blame two guys on a farm minding their own business.
Well,
Thank you.
so
It's not your fault.
what I would say is I agree. It's kind of ironic because Tim says he doesn't believe the slippery slope started with gay marriage, and you were arguing that it probably did. I would actually push it back before that. And so what I believe, and I believe we've talked about this when you were on the show before, but I'm Catholic. I believe marriage is between a man and a woman. I also believe that sex is supposed to be unitive and procreative. And when we as a society decided that we were going to accept the normalization of artificial contraceptive methods, we basically pushed this giant boulder down the hill that was going to entirely interrupt and subvert our understanding of human sexuality and what it is. And so a lot of people will say, well, this is the moment where we started rolling down the slippery slope, or this is where we should have stopped. But my point is, as soon as that happened, we had pushed the boulder and it wasn't going to stop until we tried to turn it around and reverse everything.
I don't know. I just think, as I stated, if there's some basic question of two people who want to mind their own business, I'm fine with it. If someone then tries to use that to then do something evil, we just say no. You know, we recognize the difference.
But then I guess you and I, we just fundamentally disagree over what's evil.
Well, and I certainly think too, the when it came to the question of gay marriage, this is back, what was it, Proposition 8 in California? Was a big thing or whatever?
They voted against it. Judges.
There was that famous line from Jack Black where he was like pretending to be Jesus on stage, and he says, "Your nation was built on separation of church and state." And I was confused because I was like, isn't that an argument against gay marriage? Like, if marriage is a religious institution, then wouldn't you be in fact arguing for civil unions and not marriage by saying that? I never understood. But my position was always equal rights or whatever. But I do certainly understand this does lead. I do believe gay marriage led to the question of polyamory and polygamy and things like that, because then you start asking more questions about what defines the limitations of whether or not someone has the right to tax benefits and access, and why would it be limited to only one other person?
The one I'm seeing a lot right now is just good friends who get married, and they're like, but I really they're my life partner. Like, I like them more than anyone else, and they've been in my life longer, so why would I get married to someone I'm dating versus just like my best friend forever? Well, and that is another question about unions, right?
Supposed to be what marriage was.
If we're in a post-marriage society,
That's
are
so
we allowed to?
weird.
Well,
I'm seeing this more and more all the time.
The entire reason that we decided as a society collectively to keep track, at least at the government level, of who was getting married is because we wanted to know who was accountable for which children, and also who were making children. That was the point of it, as something that was enshrined legislatively. And so once you move outside of that, and this is why I've mentioned, I think this starts with contraceptives, because then you no longer believe that marriage is about having children, about having a family. And so then it can basically become about anything after that point. You just totally broadened the definition. And I think it's impossible after that to come to a point and say like, well, this is where we're going to stop it. You've already opened that Pandora's box. Like, you no longer have that reason-based definition of what it's for, and you either have to turn around and do away with all of it, or you're just going to get more of it. And this is something that like straight people will get mad at me for too, because they'll say, well, you're criticizing contraceptives. And I think one argument that was made by a lot of gay rights activists during the 90s through 2010s, when this was much more hot button issue, was, well, conservatives actually are not living and walking the walk when it comes to this stuff, because they are using contraceptives and they are getting divorced. And that's actually true. That was one of the things that I believed opened the door for all of this.
Boy, Paul VI would be so happy right now.
Yeah,
well, I mean, he's listening. So
Saint Paul VI.
He's really very excited. Nice job.
No, it's true, and he said all
done.
that. Yeah, thank you.
He did.
He said basically all of that
60 years ago.
Yeah, it's very prophetic. Yeah.
I wonder,
Humane
the main issue for me was always about equal rights and access, not the definition of a family. I actually thought that if marriage is done in churches and in temples and synagogues, and it's viewed widely as like a religious function in this country, then there's a separation of church and state. And for the government to mandate a church provide a ceremony or whatever would seemingly be a violation of that.
Yeah,
well, this is
oh,
Christianization.
sorry.
I was going to say this is what we talk about with a post-Christian nation. Obviously, the state realized the vital importance of marriage, that they adopted it, and it became a state thing. The question is, should it still be a state thing? And I would argue it should. There's a value to the family. There's a value to moms and dads and keeping track of children. And it used to be for the purity of the bloodline also, that we weren't making sure that you were marrying your first cousin or et cetera, et cetera. That was a very important role of it. But the state has adopted principles of religion because it was valuable for society. It's very much, even from the secular point of view, someone like Thomas Jefferson, one of our great Virginians, as a proud Virginian now, I'll say, wasn't himself particularly Christian, same with Ben Franklin, but realized the benefit in society.
Yeah.
So what happens when we become post-Christian is we throw away all of that and we think society is going to continue as it is, and it's not. It's the same as if we get rid of the same as we're trying to adopt a smartphone. Kids have been the same for 5,000, 10,000, 150,000 years, and now kids are totally different because of this little device, and we can't adopt fast enough.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of hacks your brain. But I just want to mention, because you brought up Paul VI, and you're right, but I just want to mention this. Usually when I'll make these arguments, I'll get hit with, you're arguing from a Catholic perspective or making a religious argument. True that I'm Catholic, but you'll notice I did not invoke divine revelation at all.
Yeah, that was Daniel.
Yeah, that was you.
That's his
but no, but no. There's nothing wrong with that.
You can't get through one show without Catholicism.
No. I just want to mention this. When I give that explanation, I'm speaking like from the perspective of what makes sense for a functioning society. I'm not. I at no point said, well, the reason we have to do it this way is because when two baptized Christians get married and have a sacramental marriage and they're trying to get each other to heaven. I believe all of that's true, but my argument from this is from a perspective of, well, why is the government looking at this in the first place?
Yeah.
And there are plenty of non-religious reasons for that.
And we are not a healthy society. And I love that you said that. I'm looking at this for what is a healthy society. And what I find one of the more fascinating things to do is go back and look at surveys that have been done for 20, 40, 50, 100 years of happiness, of depression levels. And every single survey shows that we are a less happy, we are a more depressed, we are not a healthy society right now.
Do you agree with
way?
Do you agree with Seamus's interpretation of the purpose of family and
Absolutely.
requirement? But how do you reconcile that?
That's for God is going to ask me that question one day, because it doesn't make any sense. I'm a total contradiction, but I agree with him 100%. I grew up Catholic. I realize what I am living right now is not in accordance with my faith, but I also understand that I've for God, how many years, 20, 30 years, I tried to pretend I wasn't. And I'm like, well, that's it. You know what actually made me, a couple things made me come out, and I was in my late 20s when it happened, was one thing that made me come out was how much I didn't like gay people because of their vulgarity, their promiscuity, pride parades. And I thought, wow, I don't want to be anything like that, so I can be better. So why are we allowing gay people to have this awful reputation? Because they've brought it upon themselves, quite frankly. That was one of the things that made me come out. Another thing that made me come out were a lot of the church scandals. I grew up very devoutly Catholic, and I would see the number of things happen, and everyone would sort of absolve themselves and say, well, that's unfortunate, but we've moved on. And I thought, well, wait a second, like, that bishop is still going to be the bishop, and he knows all these things happen in his diocese, but I can't marry Andrew because that's wrong. I'm like, well, wait a second, Holy Mother Church, like, how come that bishop can keep his diocese when all this is happening? But I can't marry this. And that's a knock on the church. I admit it, and God will judge me for it. I hope he's lenient. I pray to him every day that he will be, but there are a couple of things that made me come out. But that doesn't mean when it comes to society and the role of the family, I will change my beliefs on that.
That's an interesting point about the scandals in the church and the inaction they've taken, because perhaps the corruption starts in the church and their inaction on these scandals.
Yeah, so there's definitely some truth in that. I would say that God is going to judge all of us at the end of our lives, but of the things you've discussed, I don't think the thing he's going to judge you for is pointing out that there are bad people in the church who did unbelievably horrible things. And I've spoken on this in the past. I think that anyone who is involved with the abuse of children or covering up the abuse of children not only has to be removed from their position in the church, but they need to be prosecuted to the fullest possible extent of the law. I think it's an absolute travesty what occurred. It's unbelievably horrific. But that said, that is an example of there being really horrible people in the church doing really horrible things, but that doesn't justify rejecting church teachings in other ways.
I love how the many leftists will often bring up the abuse at churches as some kind of gotcha to people who are concerned about what's happening in schools. Because it's like, let me ask you, do you think that the parents in these districts, in these dioceses or whatever, do you think that they're like totally fine with what's going on when they find out about it? Do you think that they're just like, no one tell anybody what just happened? Or do you think there's like fury, rage, and demands?
Well, I'll put it this way. There are many dioceses that have rules that say, like, no, you know, if you're a cleric or you work from the church, you cannot be alone with a child. And I have not known a single priest who said, this is unfair. You can't do this. Of course we should be allowed to be alone with children. And yet when Ron DeSantis in Florida signs legislation which says you can't have secret conversations with children about sex that you then tell them to withhold from their parents, the entire community in this country erupts with cries
Just
of
let the
homophobia.
teachers teach.
And it's don't say gay, right?
Thanks for watching this clip from the Timcast IRL podcast. Hang out with us live Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. and become a member over at timcast.com for uncensored, members-only shows exclusive. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you all next time.